Hello everybody! Welcome back to another Mountain Computers video coming to you from the workbench setup here. Now, today I have got a Dell OptiPlex computer sitting here. I ordered this off of the Goodwill auctions site and I got a pretty good price on it. I paid only $9, I believe, for this computer, plus some shipping costs. We will come to see maybe by the end of the video whether that was worth it. But the reason why I got such a low cost on this machine is because it does have one very glaring problem with it. And that is that if we take off the top panel here, you'll notice if we take a look down in the CPU socket, which I prepared ahead of time, they didn't ship it open like this, but if we take a real close look here and get the camera in focus, you can probably see that here, along with just a little bit here, and mostly up there, there is some CPU socket damage. And then also there's just a little bit of fluff sitting in the socket there as well, which will need to clean out if we're ever going to get this thing working. So, yeah, that is one major problem that today, for this video, we are going to attempt to fix and see if we can get this machine back up and running again. Now, CPU socket repair is not something that I claim to be an expert at. I don't even claim to be good at it. I don't think I've ever tried it before. But why don't we roll the intro and I will get into how we're going to attempt to try to make this computer work again. So this is a Core i5 6500 Intel processor, and theoretically, if it works and if we get the socket on this computer to work again, then these two things will work together. However, if I dropped this in here right now, obviously we would not be getting anything. I just purchased this CPU off of eBay, and of course, ideally, we'd like to know if the CPU even works at all before trying to do any repairs to this to make sure that even if we get the socket working well, that any persistent problems thereafter would not be being caused by the processor itself. And so you might be wondering how we are going to do the validation process for the processor ahead of time, because obviously we're not going to be able to do it with this machine. So I happen to have partaken in one of the favorite pastimes of the YouTuber Technology Connections, Alec over there, and I have participated in the magic of buying two of them. So if we open up this machine, which I paid a fair chunk more money for, quite unnecessarily, you can see that in this particular unit we happen to have a socket that is in good condition. There do not appear to be any bent pins on here. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is find the gold triangle, as always, line that up with the CPU sockets, white triangle over here, and then just drop the CPU into place in the socket, and bada bing, bada boom, we're done. Not quite. We also have to install some memory and hook up a display, and I'll do that real quick off camera, and then we will come back as I am starting to boot up the machine so that we can see whether this turns on or not. Okay, we're back. We have a display plugged in just up here, and I am sitting here ready to plug the power into the power supply in the back. You'll note that there's currently no CPU fan connected for as brief of a power on period as we will be doing here. That should be fine, but in your circumstances, please don't try to run your system like this. That's likely to kill it. So anyway, I'm going to plug in the power right now. I can hear the system kind of starting to try to boot up, but we've got no signs of life yet. Well, I have tried a couple of things here, and none of them have worked, unfortunately, but let's go over what I did anyways. The first thing I thought was, well, maybe it's just complaining and doesn't want to turn on because there's not a CPU fan connected. Usually that's not a problem. Most systems will just complain when you turn the system on and give you an error on screen, but that wasn't the case here. And so that really didn't wind up helping at all. I also tried disconnecting the memory in case, new memory, maybe there was a problem with that. I noticed as a symptom that if I press the reset button on the back of the power supply here, that the fans will turn on and run for a little while, and then kind of spin down and continue to operate at a slightly slower speed. And then as soon as you disconnect or depress the switch back here, quit pressing the switch, the fans will turn back off again. And so that was kind of the first thing I noticed, and then I did these other things, and then at the end of it, I noticed this problem, which bodes very poorly for what's going on here. That is this flashing light that's on what would normally be the power button. You'll notice that there is a pattern here of 2 flashes and then 1 flash, and in looking up some Dell documentation, what that seems to, unfortunately, indicate is a bad motherboard. So, while I bought this system with the intention of using it to do some extra diagnosis, along with using it outside of this, it seems like I probably won't be able to do that unless by some miracle I manage to figure out whatever the other problem is with this board that isn't the CPU socket. And I gave it a quick look. I didn't see any bad caps or anything. I'd have to do a quite involved circuit analysis of the board, which I really just don't feel like I probably feel like doing, especially right now. So we are going to be going into this socket repair blind. What a lovely proposition. I am so excited. In case you couldn't tell that there's some sarcasm in my voice right now, there definitely is. And so, I am going to swap out the machines that are on the desk here, and then we will move over to talking about the next steps in performing this repair. I'll be right back. Alright, so we're swapped back into the machine with the bad socket now, and let's talk about the tools that I'm going to be using to try to help me work out the problems with this board. Now, I'm hoping that the socket is the only problem with it, but for all I know, unfortunately, it may have the same other problem that the other system did. So we will see after attempting to do some reconfiguration of the socket here to try and get those pins back in place, at least visually as close as I can before we try and perform any kind of actual test, whether at the end of it we also get the same blinking light error here. So we'll be in for a fair journey on the way either way. And I'll probably be posting this video regardless of how the attempt goes, just for documentation and for your supposed hopeful entertainment. And so, one thing that I've got so that we can maybe make this a little bit easier on both you and myself for seeing what's going on down here, is this little microscope. It has its own wireless access point built in that's completely unsecured and a really bad security thing to have working, but I figure I'm not going to have it on very often, and so and it isn't going to sit on my Wi-Fi, so I should be okay to use it for short bursts of time. But in lieu of that, for future situations where I may have it set up on somewhat of a mounting arm and connected to a computer with a proper monitor, there is a PC mode here which operates with this DC input to operate the whole thing as a USB device. So that will probably be much better in the future, but it's not the way that I'm going to use it right now. Anyway, so yeah, this will help us get a much closer look at the socket while we're performing repairs, and then for actually performing move operations on the pins of the socket, I've got a few different things around which I'm going to try in a certain order to see whether they work or not. One is just starting with a sewing kit, which my parents had gotten me before I went to college. Thank you, Mom and Dad. We're going to try and just use some sewing needles to see if they're small enough to manage to get down into the socket there. And I have also got my iFixit toolkit sitting over here, which has many bits that go down to some quite incredibly small sizes, and it may be possible for us to try using those. I would prefer to avoid them if possible, though, considering that if I mount them into the actual screwdriver itself, the magnetic mechanism involved in doing so doesn't necessarily hold the bits perfectly in place inside. There's some wobble, and so as that goes, there would be some wobble transferred into my movement of the pins themselves, which isn't ideal, although there is the added benefit of probably some extra stability in the handle, given how much larger it will be compared to a tiny little sewing pin. So, why don't we go ahead and switch over to the microscope now. I have no clue whether the video from it is going to capture audio or not, and even if it does, I'm not sure if it'll be my phone's internal microphone, which is what you're hearing right now, or a microphone built into the camera itself, which I really hope it isn't, because it's certainly not going to be very good. But if I switch over to voiceover right now, there's a pretty good chance that you should now understand why. So I will be right back with our close-up of this CPU socket.
Well, as it turns out, there was no audio on that recording at all, so what you're hearing right now is quite an anomaly on this channel, as I do overdubs at this point very infrequently. Generally, they take a little bit more coordination to work out, but in this case, it works out pretty well, given the fact that there's no sound for me to have to try to sync up with at all. The process that you're watching here is a rather difficult one. We're seeing footage from the microscope, and you can see how generally small all of the pins are, I think, even despite the fact that everything is zoomed in so much. You just kind of get a general feel for the scale of things. You can look at the tip of that needle and see that it seems rather large on screen. So trying to move the pins back into place was a very difficult process. It was one that was made difficult for a few reasons, too. One was always trying to keep the camera pointed at what I was doing, and that wasn't quite as hard as you might imagine, just given the fact that the only viewing window that I had was also through the microscope. I wasn't really able to see that well if I was just using my naked eyes, so I was relying on that, but it was still very hard to keep the camera correctly in place looking at what I was doing, which furthered making it difficult for me to be able to move the pins correctly. Beyond that was also just difficulties with dexterity in trying to manipulate the tip of that pin. It's so small, and the pins themselves being arranged in a sort of overlapping pattern made it pretty difficult to be able to fit the tip of the pin into the exact pin that you were trying to manipulate at any given time. The pins were themselves a little bit stiff compared to the pin that I was holding. The CPU pins were stiff, in that regard. And the lighting situation was not incredibly great either. That also made it pretty hard to make this work correctly. Now, the microscope has some lighting built into it, but the way that the lights on it, the camera for the microscope worked, there was no manual exposure adjustment. Everything was set with auto exposure, and the dynamic range of the camera itself was not incredibly high. So because of that, it was very easy to wind up with a very under or overexposed shot where it was difficult to see what was going on. There's also the fact that the depth of field that the camera is capable of capturing at any time is rather narrow, so even just adjusting my hand by a tiny little amount would constantly require refocusing the camera so that not only could you see in this clip, but also I could see. The frame rate that the camera captures at also appears to be very low, and it causes this problem that you're definitely seeing, which is this sort of rolling shutter effect where all of the footage looks kind of wobbly. That is not post-processing. That is exactly what I was capturing off of the microscope in general. It came out looking just that wobbly, and in real time, when you're monitoring the feed of the camera's output, it still looks like that. But I think I am getting pretty much through this first clip, so why don't we, for now, go ahead and move back to regular in real time Matt.
Alright, so I'm back to the regular camera now, and here is our somewhat repaired CPU socket. You can definitely tell, at least from this angle, that the most damage happened up in this corner. And if I go to another angle, you'll see the way that light is being reflected here is certainly not right, indicating that the angle of those pins is not perfect, but the positioning is relatively close, minus this one pin here probably that's pretty much in the center of the view right now. So, given that fact, I'm willing to give this a shot here. So we'll just go ahead and drop our CPU into place here. We can feel that feels a little funky. It's not quite right, or at least I feel like I could. We'll just go ahead and lower the retention mechanism here, and if we zoom out a bit, we'll install our system memory here. Gotta undo those latches. That should do it. Alright, let's see if I can bring the camera to its regular zoom level here. Not 2x, and not 8 where I was before. 9's fine. Alright, we'll plug in a display in the back here, and then the moment of truth, we will try to give this system life with electricity. I am hearing the power supply do things. We are getting a blinking LED on here. So that's 2, and then 7. It'd be interesting to see what error that really corresponds to. If it's a bad CPU fan, that's probably a good sign. Let me look this up real quick. So, here's something. I saw that that particular indicator was related to a memory problem, took out one of the DIMM slots, and now we've got a white light that shows up for a little bit after the system turns on. There's still nothing on the display. I wonder if that's related to me having the wrong input selected. I hope not. It was not. Let me cycle back through here quick. But that CPU is also getting warmed up here, so with the white light, that seems to tell me that we're probably good. Oh, there's a Dell logo. The system is turning on, and let me stop it before it starts really going nuts here. There we go. So that's awesome. It seems that we were actually able to revive this system. It is running. Now, one of the things that's possible with this other memory module is that while the DIMM itself may be bad, it may also be possible that some of the pins that just aren't making good contact, being that they're on this side of the chip, may be related to connecting directly out to this memory module. So the reason why that isn't working may still be related to our repair job here. So why don't I go ahead and grab another one of these memory modules, in fact the other set that I bought, which were intended for use in the other system that is actually the one that's not working now, unexpectedly, and I'll try installing those and see if that makes any more progress. Okay, so I put in another one of these memory modules and was still getting the 2.7 blinking after I had plugged the power supply back in, which tells me that it's a pretty sure thing that the problem here is related to the CPU not making good connection with the pins that wind up communicating with this slot. Just in order to make sure of that, let's go ahead and swap the known good DIMM, since this was able to communicate just fine on the other channel, over to this second memory channel here, and give that a quick power up and see if that also gives us the 2 and 7 blinking. And if it does, then I think we can assume that, yes, indeed, it is communication with that memory channel that's causing problems. So next I am going to go ahead and try to work a little bit more on that socket, and I'll be right back with you. Alright, so I've made a bit more progress here towards alignment. I'm not sure if it's going to show up incredibly well on camera because, of course, when you're off angle, it does still appear to be fairly bad. I did some more cleaning up over here on this side, and I'm pretty sure I've got that side almost indistinguishable from stock, but as far as over in this corner, we still have some difficulty, if the camera would focus, with trying to get the pins lifted into the correct angle, especially. The overhead isn't too bad as far as getting the pins lined up on the XY axis. It's mostly the Z that is the problem, but I figure it's probably worth another shot here of trying to boot the system up, so let me get us prepped up for that and we'll give it a shot. Alright, here we are. I've got a white LED to start with here with both DIMMs plugged in. We're still staying white. We've got the CPU in there. Let's see if we get anything on screen here after a second. I'm sure that the case fan's going to start kicking in and screaming in a second here. Still waiting on the display to come up, but we've still got the white LED down there. So, oh, the system is resetting one more time, and it's kicking back on again. Still the white LED, so we're still not necessarily completely dead yet. We are kicking back off again and trying to come back up one more time. We might be in a boot loop. Oh, possibly not. There is the Dell logo. So with that, let me pull the power on this right now because that's going to be getting rather hot. Next step, I'm rather surprised by that, is to go ahead and put on a CPU cooler, I guess, and then we'll explore the BIOS to make sure that both of these are being detected and that our addition of the second DIMM isn't just completely undetected this time and therefore causing the system to boot as if it only had one. So I'm going to be right back. Okay, so down here I've got a CPU cooler connected now. I've got a somewhat dusty Corsair keyboard set up, and I'm going to go ahead and plug the power back in now that we've got the CPU cooler hooked up, and that way we can hopefully take a look in the system BIOS, which will tell us whether we are detecting all of the system memory or not. So I expect this to still take a couple tries on its boot up sequence, but I have no clue just how many retries it's going to take for it to go here. Probably another 3 or so. It seems that when the system loses AC power, it takes a few tries to go through its boot up sequence, and then thereafter we'll finally go into the BIOS, unlike the 2-sequence boot that it seems to do when it doesn't lose AC power. But I think maybe there's one more reboot here, and after that we will wind up in the Dell BIOS. Still not getting anything on the display, so here is one more kick on. You can hear there that the fans are actually kicked on this time, and also here goes the Dell BIOS. So if I start hitting F2 on boot up here, we should hopefully wind up in the BIOS where we can start looking through some stuff. There we go. Alright, so let's go to system information. Here we can see 16 gigabytes of system memory installed. Is there a place where the CPU is detected? Yes, it is a Core i5-6500 with 4, count them, 4 system CPU cores. So it appears 2 DIMMs are detected, both in 8 gigabyte sizes, and just to kind of also attempt to show you guys that that is not being supported well there. Just to show you that this is not me just swapping the other system back up onto the bench here and running it. Again, I have no clue what's wrong with this thing, but it doesn't work. And at the end of the day, this one is working. And if we zoom in on the socket here, you can see the pins on this are all perfectly fine. And yet this system is not working whatsoever. Whereas this one, now that we've done our little socket repair, is. So it can stay out of the e-waste and become a computer to do future things here on the channel with. I've got, hopefully, some relatively, at least relative to this channel's, ambitious plans for some future content which will involve the use of this very system. And given that fact, I won't tease too much here for what's going to be going on with this system, but it was kind of important that we wound up getting it running. It was also kind of important that I got the other computer running too. I just assumed that it would be. So I might look into some repair processes on that, or potentially buying another one if, as I feel is probably likely, I am not able to figure it out. And then to provide a little bit of a hint for what's going to be going on, we do also need a third computer in this setup to manage to get what I want to show off and start working with on the channel up and running. But I think that is where we're going to go ahead and end today's video, guys. So if you enjoyed the content here, please consider subscribing to Mountain Computers and give this video a like if you liked it, dislike if you disliked, and feel free to leave a constructive comment if you have one. I will catch everyone in the next video, whenever that happens to be. Thanks for tuning in, and have a good rest of your day.